Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute Next Round podcast. I'm Tim Anaya, PRI's Vice President of Marketing and Communications, and your podcast co-host. Well, Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners are just around the corner, and naturally our attention is turning to putting our shopping list together for the big meal. Now, some of us are a step ahead of that. They're already ordering their turkey or ham from their local butcher, or they're putting in their orders for their holiday pies and rolls and all the baked goods from their favorite local baker. And naturally, as our attention turns to this year's holiday meals, we're trying to look back and compare mentally, how much are we paying for a holiday meal this year compared to last year at this time? And for that matter, how much are we paying for dinner on a regular night of the week compared to what we paid last year at this time? Well, we have the perfect guest for you this week. We're pleased to be joined by Pam Lewison, who's a PRI Fellow in Agriculture Policy. She's also a farmer in Eastern Washington State, and she's an Agriculture Policy Fellow at our sister think tank in Washington State, the Washington Policy Center. And Pam writes and thinks about all of these issues related to agriculture policy. And we talk with her about this Walmart study that's been getting a lot of news lately about how much buying a typical Thanksgiving at dinner at Walmart is this year compared to last year at this time. We also talk about the impact of the Trump administration's tariffs on farmers and ranchers and their ability to produce the food that feeds the world. We also talk about the Trump administration's plan to seemingly flood the U.S. market with Argentine beef and his little Twitter war with cattle ranchers in the United States. Then we talk about other real challenges facing farmers and ranchers this year, such as immigration policy, being able to have sufficient labor sources to grow their crops and produce their livestock for the marketplace. So stay tuned. After the break, we'll have our conversation with Pam Lewison. Thanks for joining us. We'll get back to our terrific interview in just a moment, but first, PRI's YouTube channel is must watch. By visiting youtube.com/Pacific Research 1, that's the number 1, you can watch webinars, videos, and other original content, including our new Free City Center video tours and interviews. You can watch as PRI's Wayne Weingarten tours Dignity Moves, a San Francisco nonprofit that is reimagining scalable solutions to homelessness with founder and CEO Elizabeth Funk. And you can check out Stephen Greenhut's tour of a proposed new city in rural Solano County that has generated significant interest and intrigue. You can even listen to previous episodes of Next Round Podcast. So visit PRI's YouTube channel today at youtube.com/Pacific Research 1, that's the number 1, and click the subscribe button to receive notifications about our latest content as soon as it's posted. Pam, welcome back to Next Round Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you back on Next Round, especially with the holiday season upon us. I think now that we've passed the middle of November, we can get into holiday mode. And the cost of this year's holiday dinners are really at the forefront of everyone's minds. And I love that you like to write about this topic throughout the years, especially at holiday time or 4th of July. And we're kind of at that time now where we're looking at what is our holiday dinner going to cost us this year compared to last year. And we've seen there's been a big Walmart study that was recently released, kind of comparing the cost of a turkey dinner at Walmart stores compared to last year. So what do you make of the Walmart study that's been getting a lot of news lately? And more importantly, how expensive can we expect our trip to the grocery store to buy our holiday dinners is going to be this year?
So I think there's a couple of things about the Walmart study in particular that I find interesting. When you look at that study and you really start to break it down a little bit and get into the kind of the nitty gritty about it, it's not really an apples to apples comparison. So what they say is this holiday promotion, this market basket for Thanksgiving this year will cost $40, where last year it cost $55. But if you compare last year's promotional basket for the Thanksgiving meal versus this year's, there's less in it, and you are sort of getting different things that are more of the value brand, which is not a bad thing, but it is a different thing, and they cost less in general than a name brand item. So I think there's a little bit of bait and switch going on when you look at how those two things compare last year versus this year. So are you saving money? Sure. But are you perhaps needing to maybe run out and buy other things to backfill what your menu might normally include? Also, probably. So I think a great example is I don't know what everybody else's holiday table looks like. My family in particular, it's the one day a year when dessert calories don't count. So last year's holiday basket included a pre-made pecan pie. This year's holiday basket does not include that pecan pie. If it's my household, we're going to have 17 desserts because that's how we do Thanksgiving. So I think in general, when you're looking at holiday times and holiday meals, those prices are going to vary based on one, what your preferences are and what you're willing to spend, but also what your budget will allow. But on average, I think it's fair to say that this year's holiday meal is, despite what you might hear or read or see, might actually cost a little bit more than what you paid last year, unless you took advantage of last year's flash sale on turkeys and threw one in your freezer for this year.
So what do you think explains Walmart, making those changes? You think that was them trying to get good PR and maybe curry a little favor with the commander in chief?
I think it's one part good PR, but also, it's good marketing strategy. You get more people in the door, and you make up for that $15 price difference. The more people who buy at that lesser price, it makes up any difference that you may have had in that that buying trend.
And not that we're selling Walmart here or anything, but on a lot of the stuff, on a lot of basic items, there is really no difference between what you buy at Walmart and buy at other stores, and you can save a lot of money. But with what we're talking about here, meat, produce, dairy, there often is a difference.
Yeah, and I do think the other one that I think is most interesting, particularly in this year's basket versus last year's, is cranberry sauce. I don't know about you. Cranberry sauce is a must-have on our Thanksgiving table. This year's basket includes fresh cranberries. So you're going through the steps of turning that into cranberry sauce, which is actually, fun fact, less expensive than buying a can of cranberry sauce and having your sort of molded cranberry sauce. So I think those are some of those things that people may not be aware of when they're just looking at, oh, this costs less than last year.
I have made homemade cranberry sauce several times. It's not very hard to do, but it makes so much. That's the issue, that you better be prepared. Unless you have a big family, you're going to have cranberry sauce in the freezer for months and months and months after you do it. But it's pretty inexpensive. You get the bag of cranberries. I think I add in the recipe that I have. You add in chopped up apples and dried fruit like golden raisins, and then it's lemon. I think it's lemon juice and orange juice and sugars. So it's most things you probably would have in your kitchen anyway. But yeah, bags of fresh cranberries are pretty cheap at holiday time.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an overly expensive item, really, right? But certainly you're going to have to look up a recipe and add in all those extra things. My recipe for homemade cranberry sauce is fresh cranberries, the juice of an orange and its zest, some cinnamon, and some sugar. So it's basically you're effectively making cranberry jam.
That's right.
But not everybody likes it, and not everybody wants to go to that, go through that extra process when you're, maybe making everything else from scratch as well.
So we know that there were real inflation and cost of living challenges during the Biden administration. And despite what we saw in the Walmart study, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence of grocery prices are remaining high this year during the Trump administration. So now that we've had some time time to reflect upon the two, how do things kind of compare overall when you're looking at kind of average grocery prices this year versus last year? And what explains why, despite obvious policy shift,
Mhm.
that these costs are remaining stubbornly high? I mean, I can think of one, right? The California's Prop 12 on pork production.
So I think first and foremost, it's not just anecdotal evidence telling us that grocery store prices are high. The consumer price index is also telling us that grocery store prices are higher. In fact, they're about 3% higher year over year than they were this time last year. So nobody's imagining it. Things in the grocery store are in fact more expensive this year than they were last year. There are also some things that are even more expensive than they were last year, whether that's, pork is a good example. It's more expensive. Other proteins are more expensive year over year, anywhere from 1 to 15%. Milk has gone up a couple percentage points. Eggs, interestingly enough, have actually decreased in price a bit, which is what you would expect now that we've rebounded from the avian flu situation this last year. So as we look at, kind of how these things are shifting, overall grocery inflation is still a problem. And they are persistently high for a number of reasons. I think first and foremost, we live on the West Coast. The West Coast is always the most expensive place to live in the United States, bar none. So, we all like living here. That's why we live here, but also it's expensive to live here. And there are a couple of reasons for that. We have state policies that make it really expensive to live here, but also, federal policies are not helping us right at the moment either. So those two things combined have really kind of put us in a pressure cooker in a lot of ways. And, I was taking some notes ahead of our chat today and looking at what some of those things might be. Prop 12 is certainly part of that, but also, you have other regulations that go into that. Our cost of fuel is very expensive. We have some of the highest wages for labor along the West Coast in particular of anywhere in the country. We also have, high power costs. We have tariffs that are influencing that. Taxes, whether those are sales taxes, property taxes, or what have you. All of those things are sort of putting a lot of pressure on the market and causing this increase in price and the cost of living in general.
So let's talk about tariffs. You've been writing extensively on our Right by the Bay blog about all the different impacts of the different tariff proposals from the Trump administration on different ag and ranching sectors. And one of the ones that I think is interesting that you wouldn't think about is soybeans. And soybeans has actually been a huge issue in our trade disputes with China and Canada, I believe, too. So maybe for those who haven't been following it, kind of set the stage here. Just how big a deal is it for America's farmers that if our global soybean market is certainly heavily restricted, if not closed off to us? And how does, as you write, this squabble point to larger problems to come for U.S. ag?
So I think soybeans is sort of an example of a larger challenge that we have in agriculture, which is that we have a longer cycle of production and recovery than most things. So tariffs are, on the one hand, an important strategy when we're looking at how we deal with trade partners, certainly. But they also pose particular challenges in ag when we look at how we rebound from their impacts on a local level. In soybeans, we have this market that is sort of saturated with soybean production, particularly because we have cycles based on northern and southern hemisphere production. So right now, while we just sold some soybeans to China, or at least in theory, we've sold some soybeans to China, it's not nearly what we would normally sell. And China has also indicated that they will continue to fulfill their soybean needs from other countries with lesser tariffs imposed upon them, particularly from South American countries like Brazil. Now, what that does is put a lot of pressure on American producers who are relying on that income for not just their current operating budgets, but also for their next year's operating budgets and planning. And now is the time that they would normally be doing that. They'd be getting a check, paying the bank, pre-buying seed so that they can save some money on that seed crop, and getting ready to plant next year. When you don't have any certainty about what it is you are going to do next year, it creates a lot of instability, not just for your farm, but also for your banker, who in turn is wondering, are you going to be able to pay me? Are you going to be able to pay me this year? Are you going to be able to pay me next year? What about 3 years down the road? Now, when we look at how that plays out, soy is something that's sort of ubiquitous in the market. We use it for feed. We use it for all sorts of, not just domestic food, but also, again, it's something that we export heavily. So soy is kind of an indicator for what happens to everyone else. If soybean markets are struggling, so too theoretically could other markets in the United States. And it poses a really a concern for what larger ag commodities might look like moving into the future. There are opportunities, I think, to fix it, but the biggest way to fix it, honestly, is for the government to sort of stop meddling. What we really need at this juncture is for free markets to do what they do best, which is for supply and demand to start to balance out and function the way they should. Because then we don't have more in the market than we need eventually. It starts to just sort of settle out. We have the right amount, and we have those producers in sort of monoculture farms who have to learn to pivot and say, okay, well, this isn't something that we can do anymore because I'm not going to get paid for something that isn't selling. And they start to pivot, and we become more of a multi-crop farming culture again, which is theoretically what we should all be looking to be, is to have, as many eggs in as many baskets as we can to weather these kinds of up and down cycles in the market.
We'll get back to Next Round in just a moment, but first, are you getting PRI's regular email updates? If not, go to pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get the facts you need to fight back delivered every week to your inbox. Every week, PRI sends you what you need to know about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, and gives you the free market ideas needed to save our state and our nation. By going to pacificresearch.org and clicking the sign up button, you can sign up to have Policy Alert, our weekly roundup of all the best ideas from PRI scholars delivered to your inbox. Or you can sign up for event updates so you're the first to know when PRI is coming to your community with great events. So sign up now at pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get PRI's content delivered to your inbox each week. So as we tape this on November 17th, the Trump administration did a little U-turn a few days ago, and they announced they were rolling back some of these tariff proposals for ag. What exactly did they propose here, and what do you make of their, I don't know what we would call this, a change of heart?
I think that they are easing up some of the tariffs on things like coffee and some of those other things that we all sort of take for granted as items that are readily available and reasonably inexpensive. And I'm dubious about how that will work out. When the administration announced that the tariff shift would occur on coffee, instantly the market for coffee went from being quite high to dropping almost overnight. And so certainly there is some interplay between what the administration says and what happens in the market. Now, that doesn't always correlate to a shift in what the price the consumer sees. And I think that's important to note. But certainly what it does do is punish producers. So I think a prime example of that is what we saw in the beef market. As we had the announcement of the importation of beef from another country, we saw a peak in the cattle market drop several $100s effectively overnight. And what many of your listeners will note is that there was not a single cent difference in what they are paying at the grocery store for beef. And that is because the open market price changed, but the cost along the food supply chain did not change. So I think when we look at how these announcements occur, it's really important to realize that between open market price, or effectively what I would call the farm gate, and the consumer plate, there are too many steps between those two places for consumers to see a significant difference in their grocery bill.
Let's talk a little more about these challenges that are being faced by the U.S. beef industry. So, as you mentioned, the Trump administration has this plan to import beef from Argentina, which, would have the effect basically of flooding the U.S. market and, driving down the cost of U.S. beef. What's the backstory with this plan? Why would the U.S. buy so much beef from another country in the first place? It seems kind of counterintuitive to me.
So this really goes back initially to the campaign promise of the current administration, which was, we will drive down grocery store prices in the first 6 to 8 weeks of the term. As we know from the Consumer Price Index, that has not happened. In fact, grocery prices have continued to escalate year over year. So I think this is in part a desire to try to force food prices for consumers downward at a rapid pace. However, as I just noted, that is not something that happens overnight. No matter what the market price might show, that does not translate to a consumer price shift, at least certainly not directly and not quickly. And when the announcement was made in conjunction with this announcement of a fortification of how to fix the U.S. beef industry, the U.S. beef industry does not need a fix. It is the single most safe, efficient, and well-functioning industry in the world, as is our entire food system. We function at a pretty optimal level, and you can see that when you look at things like the number of people fed per acre in this country. We went from feeding about 40 people an acre in 1960 to now feeding 166 people per acre in I believe it was 2010. It's the last time that data was collected. So we're talking about a significant increase in efficiency and production with fewer people, fewer resources used, and being really conscious about the environment and those kinds of things. Now, specifically in the beef space, what we're looking at is a couple of things have coincided to make beef expensive. The first is that we have the smallest national beef herd that we have had since the 1960s. This is a historic low in the number of cattle in the landscape available for beef. This is in part because beef prices are so high, and also we have a shortage of feed. So ranchers are having to make choices about that efficiency level. Is this 10-year-old cow continuing to produce good calves? Is she the most efficient cow in my herd? If she is not, is it time for her to get sold so that I can bring in a replacement heifer that has the potential to be better genetically and better in terms of feed efficiency and calving? for me. And so I think those are some of the things that we're seeing. But when you look at what that means in terms of how to fortify our production level, it takes a little while for cattle to mature because they're living things. So unlike on the crop side where you have an annual crop, with cattle, you're talking about a 2 or 3 or 5 year, in some cases, return on your investment. So it's going to take a little while just in terms of the natural life cycle of these animals for our beef industry to expand, grow, and get back to some of that larger population scale that we may be accustomed to, and it may not ever return to a size that feels significant because we may not need it to. I think that's the other part of looking at supply and demand. We go back to this free market principle of supply and demand. Beef prices will remain where they are as long as consumers are willing to continue to pay for them. So once we reach sort of a peak price that people can't tolerate, the market will adjust itself accordingly.
You mentioned, the Trump administration has this plan to, quote, fortify the industry, which I think is interesting terminology, to fortify the industry. So what is the administration's plan and what does the industry think about it?
I think one of the examples in this document, it's a sort of 3-step plan. It seems like there's always some sort of stepped plan from the administration these days. Is doing things like providing grants for more local slaughterhouses, because as they've backed away from this notion of importing more beef to drive down the cost of beef, what they've done instead is switched gears and said, well, it's the packers. The packers are the problem now. But when we look at the data, the packers are not necessarily making a whole lot of money either. So I think what we really need to do is, again, sort of leave things alone. But this fortification in this document includes things like, let's get some more slaughterhouses out into the countryside. We'll give $25 million worth of grants to establish new USDA inspected slaughterhouses. Now, from a 30,000 foot view, that sounds just fine. But we have a lot of small local slaughterhouses available. What we perhaps need to do is consider whether or not state inspectors should be allowed to have parity with USDA inspections. And what I mean by that is right now, most states do not have parity with USDA inspections. So if you, for example, go and purchase an animal and have it processed for meat to go in your freezer, you can't sell it to anybody else because that is considered your animal that you took to a local slaughter facility, and it's yours and yours alone because a state inspected facility does not meet commercial USDA inspection standards. There are some small facilities that have both. They have both USDA certification and state certification, in which case you can sell it to whomever you wish. But as a consumer base develops, that is more and more interested in accessing meat direct from producers, what we should consider is empowering states to have local state inspectors who can go and have USDA certification so that they have both. That requires very little investment of federal dollars, but what it does do is open up those slaughter facilities that already exist in the countryside to now become USDA certified, which means that they are now commercial slaughter facilities for local folks to access direct to consumer sales so that you have less of a bottleneck at some of those larger packing houses for those kinds of direct sales. That is not mentioned in this plan. Only let's funnel $25 million to another local slaughter facility. So I think it's more about finding some of those solutions that localize answers to problems that are existing in the local market, but aren't necessarily problems that need these huge federal interventions, rather things that need to just be smoothed out some.
We'll get back to our great guest in just a moment. But first, are you following PRI on Facebook? By following PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, that's all one word, you'll be the first to read free market ideas from PRI's terrific team of scholars on all the hot issues like education freedom, single-payer healthcare, crime, homelessness, green mandates like the ban on natural gas appliances, and more. Plus, when you follow PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, you'll be the first to know when tickets go on sale for PRI's must-attend luncheons, dinners, and galas across the state. And you'll be first in line to secure your spot to hear great speakers like Michael Schellenberger, Gordon Chang, Steve Hilton, and many more. So go to facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute and follow PRI today so you'll be the first to know. Now, the president, as is the case in a lot of areas, is not one to shy away from issuing sharp words on the internet. And he certainly has had a lot of sharp words for the cattle industry response to both of these issues. And he argued in a post that the only reason the industry was doing so well in the first place is because of his tariff policies. Well, we're going to empower you as the fact checker here. Is that claim true? What has been the response from industry to these sharp words from the president?
I think the cattle industry has been, since the early 2000s, continuing to improve. Because their product has improved, genetics have improved, and again, efficiency has improved. And I think consumer relations have improved. That has very little to do with the current administration, and I would argue nothing to do with the current administration, and everything to do with the work of the many families, men and women and children who are involved in the cattle industry in this country. And I would say that is the pervasive response from folks in the cattle industry as well, which is, it's hard work to take care of living things 365 days a year, regardless of weather, holidays, other commitments that you might have. But they do it for the love of their animals and the love of the land. And no president, no administration, no anything can take credit from the people who are doing that. And I think that those folks feel genuinely justified in being upset that anyone would lecture them about the effort, time, and care that they put into their work, something that they're deeply passionate about.
So let's talk about another controversial issue involving the Trump administration and ag, and that's the immigration enforcement activities and the farm labor proposals. They've all generated significant media coverage, and you've written significantly about both of these controversies. So share with our listeners how these various proposals would impact the ability of farmers to grow the food that feeds the world. And what are farmers and ranchers really looking for when it comes to U.S. immigration policy?
I think immigration's tough, right? There's always two sides of this coin. On the one hand, you want everyone to follow all the rules and do all the right things and be here for the right reasons and be above board in everything that they're doing. But I also think that we need to be cognizant of the environment that we are in, which is an environment where most Americans have absolutely zero desire to work on a farm. And again, the data tells us that, less than 2% of the American population is directly involved in production agriculture. which means that we have a lot of people who have absolutely no interest in growing food for everybody else. So no matter where you stand on immigration policy in particular, it's really important first and foremost to understand that we need people from somewhere else to come help us provide for not just the United States, but the globe. So that said, I think I think there are a couple of things that certainly need to be addressed in how we get around discussions around immigration. I think first we need to really fix how we approach our H-2A program. The H-2A program is specific to agriculture. It provides a temporary work visa so that anyone from anywhere else who is qualified can work legally in this country without fear of deportation. There are some problems with the H-2A program. It is something that can absolutely be abused by folks who are unscrupulous in how they are recruiting people in their home countries. And certainly there have been instances where people have walked off the job and never come back. So they use it as a ticket to get here and then disappear. And I do think that in some instances, whether we want to talk about it or not, people in any situation are going to spoil it for everybody who's doing the right thing. So there's always going to be an instance somewhere where someone is doing the wrong thing. And certainly those people should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. But by and large, the H-2A program offers an elevated wage for people to earn a lot of money that they can send home to their families and loved ones in a controlled environment and do so safely. And I advocate for that as an avenue for any foreign-born worker coming into this country. That I think is the first step toward fixing a lot of things. I do also think that we need to give people who are here illegally, gainfully employed, have never broken the law, have never done anything, stepped out of line in any way except for breaking the law when they arrive, an opportunity to plead their case. Particularly in an ag space. We have plenty of examples of people who have worked on a farm for 10, 15, 20 years, who've showed up to work every single day, paid their taxes, lived in the same home, done everything that they have been asked to do without complaint, and been good law-abiding citizens, except for the one time that they weren't. And we should provide them with some sort of pathway. Perhaps there is a fine attached to that when that pathway occurs, but they are, effectively productive members of society, and they should be recognized for that.
So, with the holidays upon us, we're also at the end of the semester for most students. And, as we enjoy a lot of snack food while watching football games, a lot of people, young people especially, sadly, they don't realize where that snack food came from. And you wrote a very interesting piece for Right by the Bay on this dilemma recently and advocating for the importance of what you call food advocacy. So share with our listeners the key points from your piece.
So Lay's did a study to see if they needed to rebrand their marketing materials. And what they found was that almost half of the population did not know that potato chips are in fact made with real potatoes. I struggle with that. As a farmer, but also as someone who lives in the single most productive potato county in the United States. I can't imagine not knowing that potato chips are made with real potatoes. But I also know that there are a lot of people who live in food deserts and that sort of thing. And it immediately reminded me of a TikTok video of a young man talking about how even if you were vegan, it was okay for you to drink strawberry milk because it was also vegan. because it was strawberry milk. And the number of sort of sneering comments that generated from farmers who were like, well, yeah, but how do you milk a strawberry? For me, as someone who believes in communication and education, of course, I sort of chuckled about it, but also it made me a little bit sad that there wasn't also this thought about reaching out to this person sort of privately, not in a public and unkind way, but privately saying, hey, unless you're getting this product as a milk alternative, there is in fact no such thing as vegan strawberry milk. And so I think it sort of spurred this conversation for me anyway around how do we reach people? How do we advocate for agriculture and food production in a way that feels genuine, informational, and approachable. I think sometimes, farmers feel prickly and I don't want to say mean-spirited, but I think they feel snarky sometimes because they just expect you to know. And I think it's important that we all sort of take a minute and take a beat and realize that not everyone lives the way we live and does what we do. And so I think pausing for a second and saying, can I help you with this thing? And can I maybe lead you in a more informative direction is really important, particularly in the ag space when we talk about how almost nobody in the United States is farming in a direct way where they're putting their hands on the things that you are eventually going to consume, whether that's livestock or crops.
So as we close, from all the topics that we've discussed today, it's clear that farmers have had a lot of challenges this year. And unfortunately, most of these challenges were politician-created challenges. So on all these issues, ranging from labor to water, which we didn't really get into today, what do you think would be the ideal policy structure that most farmers and ranchers are looking for? If we were going to make you queen for the day, what policies would you champion, maybe one or two, that you believe would really ensure that our farmers and ranchers are thriving and able to produce the food to feed all Americans?
When I was prepping for this, I sort of jokingly thought that it would be great if Taco Tuesdays were mandatory for everyone, because I really like a good taco. But
Yes.
I feel like mandatory tacos is maybe that seems a little heavy-handed and the opposite of what I'd really like to do. In all seriousness, I have a good friend who says for all the people who are in the blood and guts and beer. And I do think that there are some things that would make it easier for people. But I think the biggest thing that I would like to see is that for people who are on family farms, and there's about 86% of people who are directly involved in production agriculture are on what's considered a family farm. Those are the people that we need to get involved. Those are the people who need to not just have a seat at the table. They need to have a bench at the table for decisions around everything from, water policy to labor, immigration, shipping, fuel, electricity, everything that touches their business. And they need to be able to be heard. I think one of the things that I hear most often in ag policy discussions is, why should I participate? Because nobody hears me. And I think it's really unfortunate that more farmers choose to shy away from these conversations because they don't feel as though their input is heard. And that's the single worst thing about being an advocate, is that if you feel as though you put all these things out into the world and nobody hears you, are you really making an impact? And I think people forget that small family farms in particular are the ones who kind of get ate up and lost in the shuffle, even though those are the folks that you most want to support. You want the people who you can go to the farmer's market and buy from, or you want the people that don't seem faceless and nameless to be the people you support. So if I was queen for a day, I'd clear room at the table and make sure that those folks have the biggest seat available in any discussion related to agriculture, because they are the single most important part of that decision-making process when it comes to the survival of our local food supply. And then at the end of the day, we could all go have some tacos.
Well, I think on that note, we should adjourn and go have some maybe turkey tacos, given the season. Well, Pam, a happy early Thanksgiving to you, and thanks so much for joining us on Next Round.
You as well.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for Next Round with PRI.